Good evening to everybody, and welcome to our sixth event in the series. We are finally on the downward stretch, and I want to send a shout out to everybody who's been joining us for the last 6 weeks. Also, welcome to our new attendees and for everyone that's joining us from abroad. As you all know, I am Sharon Shanmugam, and I am the chairperson of the SAICE Durban committee. This series is taking place alongside Sanlam and UKZN. It is quite awesome to have all of you joining us and supporting us through this journey. I will begin with some house rules. Please note that the event is being recorded. The participant video and audio are disabled. Should you wish to speak, please send a message to me directly using the chat function, and I will allow you to speak towards the end of the presentation. However, it is preferable for you to use the Q&A function to post your questions. We will address these during the panel discussion later in the evening. Please feel free to also use the chat function to connect with us and your peers. With reference to CPD certificates, as I've mentioned in the previous weeks, we will handle CPD certificates at the end of the series, and we will provide these certificates once you send us an email alerting us to the events that you've attended. We will then cross-check this on our attendance registers and accord you one certificate for the entire series. The students are not required to collect certificates in order to claim their credit on the vacation work, so this will not be applicable to the students. We have posted previous recordings in the chat function, and last week we had event number 5. However, event number 5's recording is not available yet, so we will be posting event number 4 today. Event number 5 will follow next week, hopefully alongside event number 6. And with that, I would like to introduce my co-host for the evening, who is the familiar face, Professor Mustafa Mohammed, and it gives me great pleasure to have you back, Prof. Professor Mohammed is from UKZN. He is an academic with a passion for research on sustainable roads, the teaching of civil engineering subjects, academic management, and professional engineering. He is an experienced academic with a demonstrated history of more than 26 years working in the higher education environment and has worked in Egypt, the UK, and South Africa. He has published more than 40 articles during his career, and these have been published in journals, and he has presented them at conferences. Thank you and welcome, Prof.
Thank you very much.
As you know, SAICE and UKZN collaborated to create the series alongside Sanlam, who is our anchor sponsor. Sanlam have graciously made this event possible, and we are indeed indebted to them. This week, Sanlam will be represented by Mr. Jacques Malan, who is a senior legal consultant with about 30 years of experience in the industry. He assists clients in structuring their businesses and understanding their business risks, as well as drafting executable wills. He helps clients get peace of mind, essentially. He has attained a number of certifications as well and has a higher diploma in financial markets and instruments. So welcome, Jacques, and I hope you all enjoy Jacques' presentation and finds it useful.
Thank you very much, Capita. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just quickly want to share my screen. Open it up. I have been asked to talk to you about estate planning Now, estate planning is something that everybody is not always thinking of. It's not always top of mind, but it is something that is very important when you are working for yourself or whether you are in a professional capacity. And the earlier you start with planning your estate, the easier it will be, because once you've accumulated a vast estate, it's extremely difficult to do anything about that. Now, what is estate planning? Now, first of all, we have to look at what is your estate. It refers to an individual's total assets minus any liabilities. And it involves your decisions regarding the management of your assets and liabilities while you are alive, and especially after you passed away, and your estate has to be wound up by your executor. If you do not plan your estate while you can and you pass away, there can be huge estate duty, capital gains tax, and income tax consequences for your heirs. And it can happen that so much tax are being paid that your heirs, in the end of the day, do not really inherit anything. And the only way to really go about planning your estate is you must get the assistance of somebody who can help you and review your estate planning. Because the decisions that you make while you are alive will determine the feasibility of your will. And if the will is not properly worded or practically tested, there could be a lot of unintended consequences for those left behind. A lot of people do not really want to talk about wills and look at their wills, because the moment that you talk about the will and you start discussing that, you talk about death, and nobody wants to do that. So it's negative. But the problem, if you don't do that, and something should happen to you and you pass away, and you do not have a will, you die intestate, and that have very severe consequences, because you couldn't stipulate who your executor must be, who must inherit what assets, and so forth. And the executor will have to use his own discretion. Now, why is it important to do estate planning? First of all, you have to look at your last wishes, so it could be properly carried out. Sanlam Trust, which is part of Sanlam, administers and wind up estates. And they tell us that about 80% of all the estates that they have to administer and wind up after a person passed away, 80% of those estates do not have sufficient liquidity. In other words, cash in the estate to wind up the estate. Because when a person passes away, there is the executor's fees to be paid. There can be estate duty, capital gains tax, there can be income tax, there can be VAT payable, and so forth. All the liabilities that have to be settled, and so forth. And if there is not enough cash in the estate, the heirs cannot inherit, because the executor first have to pay all those debts. And especially for the tax, the income tax, that is a preferential claim against the estate. And if there is not enough cash in the estate, the executor will have to go, and he will either have to sell assets, and he can't just sell assets at market value. He have to hold a liquidation sale. And a property might be worth 2 million rand, and it's only sold for 500,000 rand on the liquidity sale. So you don't want that. Otherwise, the heirs would have to pay money into the estate. And if you don't plan, unnecessary estate duty, capital gains tax, and so forth have to be paid. And often a will is not always practical. Sometimes people want to rule from the grave, and that can place a lot of pressure on your heirs. That is why it is important to get a professional advice. There is a lot of people out there that will draft a will for you, but not everybody are capable of giving advice. You get certain professionals that will draft a will, but they only take instructions, and they will not do an analysis for you and tell you what the consequences of that will is. So you must get hold of somebody that can give you advice regarding the drafting of the will and what will happen in practice. Now, what we do with our estate orders that we do for our clients, we give advice on the drafting of the will. We assist with the planning of business structures. the proper use of legal structures such as trust companies and so forth. We look at the estate liquidity, that is the cash component when your estate is wound up. We look a bit at tax planning, business continuity where you work for yourself. What is going to happen to your shares after death? Your wife can't go on with the business, your children maybe can't come into the business. And if you are the sole heir or the sole owner of that business, and you do not have a business continuity plan, your business can just disappear into thin air. So we will give advice on that. And then we also look at family care maintenance. How does it work? Estate planning and auditing entails a proper assessment. We look at the practical feasibility of a will, the liquidity of the estate, the continuation of your professional practice. We look at all the possible tax consequences, estate duty, capital gains tax, executive fees. We look at trust deeds. In South Africa, we have a very high divorce rate. So there is often certain costs to be paid to a previous spouse. We also look at your marital dispensation, because depending on whether you are married in community property, out of community property, with or without antenuptial contract and things like that, it all plays a role of how you can bequeath your assets and what can happen in practice. If we look at how the planning process works, is there's quite a lot of information that's needed, and they always say garbage in, garbage out. So there's a lot of information that have to be supplied. Your will, financial statements, if you have any assets and liabilities, all the current values, the market values. And then we go and we do a proper planning, and we look, when we do the planning, that we try and avoid unnecessary capital gains tax. We look at how to save on executive fees. We look at the best allowable tax rates, legal structures, saving on income tax. Where you are in a business, we look at putting agreements in place so there's business continuity. So there's a willing seller and a willing buyer, and at the correct price. We look at your minus curbing estate growth and so on. So that is everything that we do in the estate planning. Now that is in short what we do. And that's the end of my presentation. So I just want to add now that every week there is a giveaway. And the prize winner for last week is Eviwe Dukada of UKZN. And he will be contacted shortly to receive his prize. Thank you very much for participating. And on the screen now, you will see the names of the 3 Sanlam advisors that are involved in this project. So if you want to talk to anybody regarding your will, regarding estate planning, or any question that you have, you can contact any of the 3 mentioned persons whose information is on the screen. And also for next week giveaway, you will see the link on the screen, and that is the link that you can use to participate and complete the information to come into the next week giveaway. Yes, and that is my presentation for the evening. So I hope you are taking something away from that. And nobody wants to talk about wills and estate planning, but it is something that is extremely important. There was a court case where a judge has said the most important document that a person might draft and sign in his life is his will. Because you work your whole life, you plan your whole life, you accumulate assets. But if you do not have a proper structure in place when you pass away, everything that you've built up, everything that you worked for, can just disappear into thin air, and there can be a lot of unnecessary costs and also a lot of fighting between your heirs. So it is very important to do a proper planning and plan what is going to happen after your death. Thank you very much. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you for that, Jacques. Okay, so Thank you again, Jacques. Sorry, something just changed on my screen, so I was a bit concerned. But yeah, very multifaceted discussion. I heard you go through death and through wills and then everything else in between. So yeah, definitely a relevant topic, especially in this era and in this time over the last couple of months. It's so important to us, for us to, you know, be proactive in this regard. So thank you again, Jacques, and thank you to Sanlam. I just want to encourage everybody again to please enter the competition. As you can see, we've had winners each week, and congratulations to this week's winner. And yeah, I look forward to the next speaker from Sanlam next week. So now on to the next part of our evening. And for this, I will welcome Prof again, and he will take you through the introduction of our keynote speaker. So welcome again, Prof.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and thanks Sanlam for coming on board and assisting us with this a very important series of talks. Today, we will listen to a very experienced professional who is going to take us into facilitation of sustainable development. So no wells, no death, we talk about sustainability. Neil is a very well-known professional. He is a quantity surveyor by profession, graduated from UKZN. I don't want to say when, but it's a long time ago. And then he got a master's degree from University in Pretoria in 2005. And he holds also a computer science qualification from UNISA and is a professional member of the Royal Institution for Chartered Surveyors. After 18 years in professional consultancy, Neil joined as a research project manager in the field of facilities planning and management, where he managed South Africa's first national green buildings program, what we call Green Buildings for Africa. And that was from 1999 until 2003. His newly found interest in green buildings and sustainable developments, linked with his QS and FM experience, led him to join a large international consultancy in London in 2005, modeling aspects of green buildings for developments across the world. Projects included new cities in China, India, Middle East, and the large developments for Harvard University in the USA, international airport extensions in the UK and Europe. So all these were part of what projects he were working on. He has delivered sustainability training and guidance to technical and professional consultants in UK, Ireland, Spain, Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Singapore, Hong Kong, India, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and Australia. Fortunately, Mars is not included yet. After starting his own niche consulting practice in London 2012, Neil has provided life cycle cost modeling and reporting to around 150 prestigious projects in central London and across the UK. He is currently based in Durban, enjoying the warm weather, having semi-retired back to South Africa. He is close to his children and grandchildren, and currently he participates in climate change mitigation projects as a specialist and specialist consultant to the International Finance Corporation, which is a member of the World Bank Group. I think this is very impressive bio. It's not the whole CV. Without further ado, I ask Neil to please take us through the journey of sustainable development. And please, anyone with a question, type it in the Q&A function, and we will try to attend to your questions after the presentation. Neil, over to you.
Thank you for the intro, Prof. And thanks to SAICE for the opportunity. And welcome to everybody who's listening. I hope in some of my experiences with you this evening, and that you'll enjoy some of the work which I've been able to participate in. I will share my screen and Right. Should be good to go. Sustainable development. It's a huge topic. It means so many different things to different people, and obviously within the context of our own individual pasts as well as our present situations and what we perceive the future to be. Working alongside many different disciplines with specific focus areas, which are social, environmental, technological, financial. Sustainable development can be modeled in different ways for different scenarios within different projects, and I hope to do some of those with you tonight. A few related projects, hoping to illustrate the power of modeling in decision making at an early stage. My focus is mainly going to be on the built environment, because that's where I live. But just to set the scene, in terms of sustainability, what are the challenges? And I think one of the major challenges we face is that by 2050 in South Africa, we're going to see an enormous number of people moving into the cities. They're saying United Nations are projecting that by 2050, we can expect about 80% of the South African population to be living in the urban environment in cities. This major move to urbanization across the world puts pressure on all sorts of infrastructure, resources, employment, transportation, fresh air, and this goes on. But I think that this growth in population and the huge growth in urbanization, where we see that close to 90% of the new population in Asia and Africa will be moving into Asia and Africa, and 2.5 billion people added to urban areas by 2050. Greenhouse gases, wherever you stand on the science, global greenhouse gas emissions, we measure these per country. You can see a list there of emissions ranked per, and so we sit down there at 15th at the moment. This is a true reflection of emissions per person. It's just the total emissions that each country is measured. We see the big issues around China, the US. Go down and have a look at emissions per capita to really drill down to where the issues are. In terms of emissions reductions, over the last probably 10 to 15 years, there have been enormous moves across the world to reduce emissions per capita. And just in terms of where we are and how we're doing, we're sitting at about number 51 in the world, and having reduced our emissions by about 13% between 2008 2018. United Kingdom, which I was in place of their emissions per capita, and so many things involved in influencing emissions per capita. Economic scale of each of these countries is very different. The income per capita is very different across the board, and the consumption that in each of the countries is very different. All influence emissions.
Neil, sorry for the interruption, but it looks like the sound picks up from your side. So most of the sentences are not complete.
Right.
I'll
try that.
I think it's a connectivity issue. Do you think it is better if you reconnect? Can we be guided by Matthews, the IT guy, Matthew?
So it is definitely a connection issue there. Reconnecting, probably if you just reconnect the dongle he has, that can work a bit better than just going off the call and back on the call. So Just a quick reconnect on the dongle, and then we can proceed again.
Right, we'll take a break for about 30 seconds or so, waiting for Neil to reconnect.
Right, will do.
Thanks a lot. So we apologize for this technical problem. We are waiting for our speaker to come back. I hope this will happen within the next few seconds. But meanwhile, let me again thank Sanlam for supporting this initiative from UKZN Civil Engineering, and a big thank you to SAICE for their efforts in the organization. So we have Neil back here. Neil?
We're back.
Yeah, I think it will be also good if you keep your video off so that you save some bandwidth. Maybe this will improve the of the sound.
Yes, okay, I'll do that.
Yeah, it looks a little bit better now. Yeah, we can see the presentation, all good. Yeah.
Driving screen up, and then we can go. Here we go. Okay, hopefully we're back on track. So we've spoken about missions person. I wonder if I should just keep moving on so that we don't run out of time.
Yeah, please. Yeah,
so I spoke briefly about emissions per capita. South Africa currently is standing at about 50th, 51st in the world in terms of reductions over the last 10 years. That's in reductions per capita. Water stress, familiar to all of us, I think, who live in Southern Africa. The Department of Water Affairs has their strapline, which is "Water is life," and I think that really frames the challenge. But it's not only life-giving to us, but it's life-giving to the economy. Industries rely on water. Employment relies on industries. Investment relies on industries, and all of our whole place in the global economy relies on all of these factors. And water is very much a driver below everything. Water stress really needs within the context of Southern Africa, and I'm sure as civil engineering practitioners and students, you're very much aware of this and your opportunities within your domain, your discipline, to be able to assist with a lot of this. So having moved on and focusing on the built environment, there's so many challenges inherent within sustainable development, and we often rely on techniques of modeling to be able to understand the what ifs. What if we tried that? What if we did that? What would the outcome be likely to be? And these could be in terms of water consumption, energy consumption, but might be in areas which we can't touch and feel, things like carbon emissions, employment down the line, in job creation, and air quality. So many different aspects that we could be modeling to help us to understand where we are. I'm speaking to groups of engineers, civil engineers. I'm a quantity surveyor, a QS, which, apologies for Monty Python got it wrong. And yeah, he thinks that land surveyors are quantity surveyors. With the tripod, I think he thinks is a quantity surveyor. surveyors definitely work in costing, not with tripods and things like that. From a US perspective, a lot of the modeling that I've been involved with have been framed around this, the cost of change. And particularly within early stage planning, the more thinking and modeling and comparatives we do, the closer we can get to a solution which optimizes an outcome. And the earlier we make decisions to change, the less those changes will cost the project or cost us as individuals. So we look to early changes with less costs right up front. I think that's sort of the foundational with a lot of our cost modeling going forward. I'm going to take you through a couple of very quick projects to illustrate the power of modeling and where, as a QS, I've been involved, but multidisciplinary groups. Just some working within multidisciplinary teams and teams of specialists surrounding me. So I'm definitely not an expert on every facet of these projects. Would have been participating as a data modeler, QS, cost consultant. This one is a UK-based project, and it was working with groups of academic researchers, electrical, mechanical, civil engineers, and energy specialists, supporting decision-making in terms of UK energy services through 2050. So Energy Technologies Institute was the client, and I'll tell you a little bit more about them as we go through. The driver behind the project that we were was the change to the UK climate change approach. They passed an act in 2008 requiring enormous reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, 80% by 2050 relative to 1990. And this is a serious issue for manufacturing as well as transportation, as well as the energy sector, built environment generally. The backdrop to that, the electricity supply across the country. This was the mix as of this time last week. You can get a real-time fuel mix at any time from the UK on the website, but you can see how reliant they are on gas. Gas is the blue segment, 44% reliance on gas, about 30% on renewables, small amount on nuclear, and yeah, that's the carbon intensity currently sitting at 194 grams per CO2 per kilowatt hour. So that's the backdrop. Electricity transmission across the UK is managed by the National Grid. The National Grid is owned and operated by the UK National Grid, but electricity distribution in regions is managed by a number of regional distributors. You can see them there, 1 to 10. Those are the bigger ones. Obviously, in the last month or two, there's been a little bit of a shake-up in the UK energy market, and some of these may have changed or shrunk or disappeared. And yeah, there's quite a lot happening at the moment with the changes in relationships internationally with their energy suppliers. But the electricity distribution generally handled by a number of regional distributors. And gas, natural gas, you saw on the slide earlier that we were 40% reliant on natural gas, 44%. So natural gas is delivered across pipelines from north to south, some at very high pressure, 7,600 kilometers of 32 and 34-inch mains operating at around 85 up to 85 bar, very high pressure, and then major networks all the way down to about 250,000 kilometers of low pressure mains running in the ground, serving around 23 million odd customers across the UK. In that network, we see that about 89,000 Ks of that network is old iron pipes, between 50 and 100 years old. So they're aging, difficult to refurbish, and the astronomical costs of accessing underground networks in congested cities and residential areas. So the gas comes in, most of the gas being imported, 44% from Europe, 13% coming in tankers from other sources, and then being stored, some above ground, some below ground. The natural gas is stored in large diameter pipes under pressure, and some of it's stored in salt caverns. Very interesting to follow some of these technologies. So back to the project, the ETI, Energy Technologies Institute, was set up around 10 years ago, and its goal was to develop some indicative pathways which the UK could follow to achieve these 2050 goals. So how do we cut down this carbon, and what impacts does reducing the emissions have on the national energy networks? So in order to meet these objectives, there would also be a requirement to develop technologies to support changes in the network. So the ETI was set up as a public-private partnership between UK government, National Grid, some of the energy service providers, and that list that you see there, BP, Caterpillar, EDF, Rolls-Royce, Shell, and Innovate UK. There was some academic research funding in there. Hitachi also got involved a bit later on. So these are industries which are interested in developing technologies to be able to support innovative energy transmission. Some of the challenges they were facing, the main one I think there is around shutting down the majority of the gas network. 23 million people currently using gas. How do you shut that down? And what impact does that have on the electricity infrastructure and the gas infrastructure, and how do you move from now until 2050 into that position? Also, a lot of pressure around the electrification of heat and of transport, electric vehicles, rechargeable cars, trucks, buses. All of these have a major impact on the way that you deliver electricity to the consumer, and really starts to get quite nervous. So what the ETI did was they developed an autonomous modeling environment called ESME. Modeling environment, and ESME uses inputs from a number of places. The generation data, so from the generators, that's the power stations, but the renewable wind, solar, etc. Demand data from all of the consumer side, so it's using the distributors, the energy distributors, to be able to measure what the demand patterns look like seasonally, hourly, and then it required network cost data. So this is where our team plugged in, was delivering this network cost data to the project. And then those three elements of data plug into ESME, and ESME can then be used to develop pathways to decarbonization, which can then illustrate to the who's the triple P at the end, where they could be making targeted investments in research and development of technologies to be able to meet the demands coming out. So areas that we were interested in were these factors of gas, heat, and hydrogen. CO2 was added towards the end of the project. Obviously, moving CO2 around and storing CO2 becoming more and more topical. But the major project was around those four vectors of heat, electricity, hydrogen, and how we deal with those, the existing networks, and how we move them to a 2050 end game. So looking at the vectors that we were studying, there are all sorts of permutations. So just in electricity, for example, repurposing voltage, increasing capacity of existing overhead, underground lines, repurposing AC infrastructure to DC, obviously to take advantage of the enormous savings in energy losses that you would benefit from DC over AC. Also building new AC with step-ups and step-downs, building new DC with step-ups and step-downs. A lot of the offshore infrastructure, wind power being generated in the North Sea and the English Channel, coming onshore using DC, and then being able to convert that DC into AC efficiently and use that within the existing AC grid, or in fact repurposing the entire grid to DC to take advantage of reduced losses. This introduces a whole new ballgame, because for us to be developing costs for these, and some of these technologies have never been built. For example, a couple of the things that we were needing to cost was, the first one was a 6,000 MVA HVDC to HVAC converter station. No one's built that yet. And you can speak to the likes of Philips or Siemens, and they will give you some guidance on it, but we'll only really start signing in earnest once an order is placed. Likewise, the 2,000 MVA HVDC to HVAC converters, those not been, and all of the switch gear and the gear that goes with it, been into use anywhere. So there were some challenges around that. Look, for the academic team as well as the technology teams to say at what level should we be targeting these technologies to be able to deal with the major change in the energy network nationally. Also, the conversion of natural gas equipment to be able to carry hydrogen. So we've got thousands of kilometers of natural gas pipe networks. Can they be repurposed to carry hydrogen? Well, the nature of the gas is very different, and the behavior of the gases in installations such as compressors and pressure reducers are very different, the way that the gases perform and behave. Also, just not simple things, but right down to the level of how do you build the pipeline? Because to be able to lay a steel pipeline to carry hydrogen requires a high level of skill and coded welders, and those coded welders not currently readily available on the market in the UK and Europe. So there's a whole training issue that comes around, and the market to take up the construction of some very specialized pipelines. Also be able to some of the storage, for example, storage of gas sometimes is done in salt caverns. Can those salt caverns be used to store hydrogen, or can they be used to store compressed air, which is generated from electricity? So being able to store electrical energy as compressed air, and then reverse the compressors to generate power when on demand, when you need them during peak times. So lots of very interesting options and technologies being considered here. But that's all very well. We have to capital costs. So referencing all of the specialists around the table, there were a few universities present, and the technology specialists from the likes of Rolls-Royce, BP, Shell. We built a library of capital costs for a multitude of network components. So there were literally thousands of network components which have been costed within each of the realms of electricity, natural gas, etc. And for new builds, repurposing to another vector, so changing from to hydrogen or natural gas to carbon dioxide, and then the cost of abandoning the end of life. It's not a question of both ends and just forget about it. Some of these cables carry oils, and oils eventually will begin to leach into the underground water, so they need to be removed. Some of them contain copper, very valuable commodity, so need to be dug up and that copper extracted. Some of the big mains, 30-inch mains, 32-inch mains, just leave them in the ground because they cause collapse if they did deteriorate and you weren't using them anymore. So they were pumped full of foamed concrete or similar, just to stop ground collapse above the abandoned lines. All of these aspects need to be considered for us to be able to model the pathways reasonably accurately. In the context of regional variances, so within capital cost modeling, we needed to model as a part of the modeling, we needed to consider the regional variances. Obviously, labor, materials, and plant cost differently in different regions. Northern Scotland, working up in the Scottish Highlands, very, very difficult terrain, lots of rock, very difficult access, long haulage kilometers to get there, versus working in central London, where you've got, you just pull in the road and close the road for a long period of time because of the congestion that it would cause. On conditions, network operators, the large number of network operators that were involved will play into the cost modeling exercise. Once we determined that, we then started working on operating costs, because we need to know how much it costs to build, but we also need to know how much it'll cost to operate. So those operating costs calculated into direct costs, which are the direct costs of operating and maintaining the network, versus the indirect costs of managing its actions, collecting the bills at the month, and all of those costs which we add to operating costs of the network. One of the complexities that we came across was the likelihood of failure. So when we're calculating operating costs and the costs of maintenance and replacement of elements within the network, we need to know what the likelihood of them failing would be over their lifetime. So we employed a group of specialists who had worked in grids like the UK's for many years. Failure, we decided that we would model 4 scenarios, and the first being mature technologies. These are things that have been around for many years, technologies, and active and passive. So passive components would be a pipeline, would be a cable in the ground. Active components would be a pressure reducing station, transformer, anything which might have which doesn't just sit there and not need any attention. So we looked at probabilities of failure, and those were modeled. You can see from the graphs here how very different they are. The innovative technologies I mentioned earlier on, that there were certain technologies we were pricing, like the HVDC to AC converters. What's the likelihood of an active component like that failing? Well, using Weibull distribution, the consultants came up with these curves that there might be a midlife crisis, which we would have to deal with some of these innovative technologies. They might tend to fail midlife, way ahead of their expected life, and we'd need to be dealing with those costs and the likelihood of them falling over. So you can see from this the sort of complexity we're drilling down into now around how we project costs of operating the networks within each of the vectors, the energy vectors that we've been looking at. But then we all know that life is not plain sailing. So the top of the diagram there, you see the guy, these are the expectations. We could calculate the costs of laying a new pipeline or a new DC cable from A to B, but we know the reality is that it's not going to happen like that. So how do we deal with those aspects of project costs? And we introduce the concept of optimism bias. Optimism bias is a cognitive bias that causes someone to believe that that they themselves are less likely to experience a negative event. So it's the kind of, it'll never happen to me, that sort of approach. But so optimism bias, the HM Treasury, this is the UK Treasury, has developed an approach to mitigating against optimism bias in major projects. So we look at the influencing factors of optimism. So there are a number of them in terms of how we procure, how complex the project is, what are the environmental impacts, for example, how much innovation is there in that project, client-specific stuff like large number of stakeholders that we've got to keep having massive meetings that cost a lot of time and money to make decisions. What's the environment like? How much permitting and consents and approvals do we need from local authorities, from Joe Public? And then external influences like politicians, local and foreign economics, things like legislation, regulations. If we're importing new technologies, what sort of levies are there going to be, and how difficult is it going to be to get them across the border? So all of these can be mitigated against, and what we do is we apply a mitigation factor against each of them as we think through them for this data, each of the technologies, and we can adjust the final cost using an optimism bias mitigation adjustment. But at the end of the day, this is really what the network costing would be assembled from. So we'd have the vectors, the various vectors that we're costing, components, which are then assembled into assemblies, and they're in different modes of construction, whether they're buried or overhead or in a tunnel. And the regional contexts that we've spoken about with various ground conditions and access. We also look at learning curves, some of the innovative technologies. The costs will obviously decrease over time. We see that with things like solar panels, photovoltaic panels. We've seen how there's been a learning curve applied to the cost of solar panels. And right now we can buy solar panels a lot cheaper than we could 5 years ago, 20 years ago. And that's the learning curve that the industry goes through in terms of manufacturing, distribution, and marketing, and the uptake in the industry. So we apply learning curves to the costs of each of the technologies that we're using. And we can calculate a construction cost, some overheads, optimism bias, then the operating costs. And we come out with outputs that can then be into ESMO, is the modeling environment ETI was using. And ESMO required from us some probability tables. We also needed to identify the most influential components within the system. Which of those components cost the most over the life cycle of the network? And then the PPP partners focus on those most influential components and look at research and development of those components. This is just a views of the tool. It was all built in Excel, and Excel with VBA behind. Looks rather grand, if you don't mind me saying. But yeah, this is the modeling tool that we built for cost modeling. Most assemblies in this particular project, most influential components, gives us an idea of the percentage of the construction cost of each of the components, so we know where to focus. It gives us our annual OpEx. You can see the sort of bathtub curve there, which is showing us that there's an early likelihood of failure and then only a very much later likelihood of failure to this particular project. So it was using mature passive technologies. That's at national level. Share very quickly, there are some models which you might find interesting as engineering discipline. Working on a project with the World Bank Group called APEX, and APEX is for modeling cities. We have currently modeled about 10 cities around the world, and we have a order list of another 20 to 30 waiting to be done. But what this does is it takes data from organizational databases, so nations, World Bank, country-specific databases, which describe the way that the countries work. It GIS remote sensing information, which we can collect from satellite imagery relating to the city, and we can then engage with the city and get the user to also the city user to provide some information. We pass it through some nation engines. The one is on energy, transportation, air quality, solid waste, water and wastewater. We do all sorts of calculations there, so it projects from now to the likely outputs would be as the population grows. Some greenhouse gases and some costs from a cost database. It calculates employment and very quick sort of city level model. I'll explain a little bit more about what it does. Many cities have done many things to try and become more sustainable. So we take sort of the best case studies from countries around the world. We've had some interns working on this and extracting for us, and we use the outcomes which have been proven to be able to build our database of expected outcomes. So you can see here from the examples that are up on the screen, there are a number of them that have been done. They're not rocket science. They're really simple mitigations, interventions. They can be done really simply, and somebody's already done it, so you can learn from them. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. Have been done things like a green building code in Joburg, Singapore have done a lot of work around sustainability in the built environment. So we take that learning and distill it down into case studies, which we can then apply to cities, illustrate to them how they can become more and more sustainable by applying very simple, proven mitigations. This is just some of the target areas that we're looking at. Built environment, very self-explanatory, I think. Fossil fuel energy, we're looking at fossil fuel in vehicles, how to reduce that. We're looking at reducing unmanaged waste and improvement in water security, looking at reductions in water demand and improving access to water and low carbon wastewater treatment. So lots of civil type stuff down here. And we have, in fact, we do have a civil engineer, she's a PhD civil eng in the States. The team that we're working in the moment is 3 of us. The team lead is in Singapore, I sit in Durban, and Rain sits in Washington. And we've been working on this now for about 3 years. This is what the tool looks like. This is a model that's being run in Ethiopia. And it's just an illustration of how the tool looks. It's now currently online and is in a web platform, which cities can then pull into, model their city. We should be able to model most major cities in the world with the data that we've collected. The city can name in their country, and it should do the model for them. They can fine-tune it and be able to doing different things. This one, in fact, was improving building code. So saying that all new buildings would have 20% savings on current energy standards applicable to all buildings. And in this particular city, we're seeing we'd expect about a 6.7% improvement in built environment energy. And we get an associated cost with that, and we also get an associated jobs created and an associated emissions reduction. Some of the tools being used to do some projects. This was one that was done in Kazakhstan for Almaty, just to try and assess the sort of climate financing that might be available. bearing in mind that this is a World Bank project. I'm working with the IFC on this, looking to co-invest in infrastructure. And these are some of the investment opportunities that they've identified with Kazakhstan in Almaty. Similar one in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. Looking at identifying climate investment opportunities. Obviously, Ho Chi Minh emissions, so there's low-hanging fruit there, and buildings, lots of low-hanging fruit there. So that's at city level. At building level, I've worked probably for the last 7 years with a program called EDGE. Buildings, you may come across it in South Africa by local developers now. EDGE is a free-to-use model that building developers can dial into, model the impacts of certain measures on your building. So it's building level modeling, various building types that you can, mostly residential at the moment. Currently certifying about 1 million square meters a month across the world. Linked to certification, green building certification, which is available. It can also just be used free by anybody to go and assess their new building project. You go to edgebuildings.org, I think it is, Edge Buildings. Well, Google Edge Buildings, you'll be able to, edgebuildings.com. Edgebuildings.com, and you'll be able to get into the tool. Most types of buildings that you want to work on. Modeling we also use to support certification. There are a lot of them around the world. In South Africa, we've got in the UK, there are a number of standards available. There are a number of standards. All of these require modeling of some kind to be applied to determine projected environmental outcomes for construction projects. I use a specific standard that I focus on is around life cycle cost analysis. So I look at life cycle costs over periods of time, and there's a wonderful set of standards which will keep you awake at night. Is ISO 15686 as an international standard for life cycle costing, service life prediction. I'm not really going to bore you with this, but it's life cycle costing looks at what we were speaking about, the infrastructure work in the UK network, its maintenance operation costs. Buildings, occupancy, and end of life. Things that is the way that we use buildings. This is a typical outcome from a life cycle cost analysis produced for a specific building. So we look at what are the factors that influence service life, what are the factors that influence and strategies, and how they would influence the total life cycle cost of the building. We can apply it right down at component level, so comparing different types of building components. It might be different types of external walling in buildings, looking at life cycle costs, embodied carbon, and life cycle carbon with outputs that look something like that. This is a comparison of different floor finishes within a building development, and we can use this to try and assist the design team in selecting floor finishes which would have the lowest life cycle cost, which includes cost of replacement, cleaning, etc. maintenance. I think that's probably me, and thank you very much for listening. I haven't lost you too much along the way, and that you found a lot of this to be relevant to you and at least interesting. That would stimulate some further reading and discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Neil. Very informative and interesting, especially in the context of the energy crisis we have in the country. Waiting for more questions to be posted in the Q&A section. Let me start by asking you a question about the city level modeling. Did you run any modeling for Durban?
I'm not sure how much I can say, but I'm sure Durban is on the shopping list. But yes, I have personally run modeling for Durban because I have an interest in it. And in fact, when you go into the model online, it is already set at Durban. So I've set Durban as the kind of default city that any user would see when they first go into the Apex tool. But yes, I have modeled for Durban. I've not done any of the mitigation measures yet, but I'm hoping that we will be moving forward with something like that soon. We have, in fact, recently modeled Ekurhuleni. So the Ekurhuleni metropolitan area has been done, and that's been presented to the Metro Council and a number of projects identified for them to take forward as part of their carbon reduction plan over the next to 2030, I think.
Any interesting outcomes which are not confidential and you can share with us?
No, I think I can share them with you. I think the least surprising is probably transportation. One of the interesting challenges we have in South Africa is the high use of private vehicles at the one end of the scale and the lack of public transportation at the other end of the scale, and trying to move as many people onto public transportation as possible in the most cost-effective, practical way. We've seen such contrasting projects in transportation. I think Pinetown's a good example of the sort of rapid transport installation where they've been really struggling to get rapid transportation going. Whereas in Cape Town, where I am now, rapid transportation forms the backbone of moving people around. So, you know, there are success and less successful projects that we see. Around the world, those sorts of rapid transportation solutions seem to work really well. In Ekurhuleni, the uptake on the rapid transport system which they've built has been very slow. And I think it's possibly something that needs to be handled at a higher level than the city managers. I think it's possibly it needs intervention at a different level. The other interesting outcome was in solid waste management, where we see an enormous amount of organic waste being collected and landfilled, and the opportunities which lie within the A, the correct disposal of organic waste, and B, the opportunities to convert organic waste into energy. You know, there's some low-hanging fruit in there, which I think they will be pursuing alongside the independent power producers agreements, which they're busy formulating as a metro. So hopefully we'll see less good stuff going into the landfill and more energy coming out of the pipes at the end.
Yeah. In fact, we had a presentation a few weeks back on Go Durban, and that was really on my list of questions. My next question was about the rapid transport. And do you see that this is really a sustainable solution for our transportation system problems?
Prof, I think looking internationally at how rapid transport systems have succeeded, I think there's an opportunity for them to succeed. But I think that in the South African context, we probably need to step back and identify what the enablers would be. So I think there are a number of enablers which we could access in this country, and I think there've been attempts to do that. But the car train is an example of where you've got service buses running alongside the car train. But I think there's the rapid transportation generally. I think the enablers in South Africa are important. It's bringing people to the nodes because people are very distributed and can't afford to pay huge amounts of money to get to the rapid transport node. And I think that's
Yeah.
one of the big issues that
I
we have. And I think,
yes.
yeah, it's just those enablers that I think we've got to identify what they are and how we can facilitate them engaging with the rapid transportation systems.
I have a concern about the rapid transportation system is that we are a little bit late, and the problem is that by the rate we are applying, by the time we have that system up and running, I think the technology will be in a different level, and this whole investment would have been gone for nothing. So if we don't put the enablers very soon and we start really getting the system up and running very soon, we may end up losing the whole idea if new technology and information comes in the near future, which may be the case. But yeah,
I think you're quite right.
The questions. We have a first question from Smriti Singh. Do you believe that the HELE technologies that South Africa plans to use for coal stations is a green project?
I don't know anything about them, I'm afraid. So I'm afraid I can't answer that.
At least, can you please tell us, Smriti, about that HELE? What does it stand for? Then we have a question from Wandeli. What is the most important constraint to look at when modeling a city? I think that's
what is the most important?
Most constraint.
Oh, most important. Yeah. A lot of our modeling is done at very high level based on population and population growth. And one of the things we're trying to get our heads around as we develop this modeling tool is the whole urbanization move, and how much of the population that grows, how much population growth within a metropolitan area will urbanize, and how many will move outside of the city boundaries, and how will businesses react to population growth and urbanization. And we see in South Africa, I think we've seen quite a lot of decentralization happening within cities because we've had the space, but there are many cities in the world that don't have that luxury. And you see massive growths in, say, some of the Eastern European cities where they're highly constrained in terms of land area. But the population continues to grow, and how we react in terms of buildings that we build, how businesses operate and businesses expand. It's one of the big challenges, and that's the first real constraint that we've come across is population and population growth. The second thing we battled to do is to relate building areas to population growth, the growth in building area to the growth in population. Building area data is very, very difficult to get hold of. We're now working with some GIS specialists trying to semi-automate the calculation of building areas within cities. We can get from the likes of Google and TomTom and those sorts of service providers, OpenStreetMaps, we can get roof areas, so we can get the area of buildings as they're seen from the sky. But as you know, the buildings vary in size, they vary in the number of stories, and it's really difficult to try and calculate the exact number of square meters of buildings which relate to a city. And one of the big challenges we're currently facing is how to relate the calculation of projected building area as the population grows. So yeah, if there are any of your students out there that are looking for some GIS research opportunities, calculating total floor areas of buildings is one of the big challenges around the world. We've had a go at some of them, and yeah, one of the calculation methods is to look at the shadow that buildings cast and calculate the height of the building from the shadow. But that's fraught with difficulties, especially when buildings are crammed together into a tall city. and the shadow might not be apparent, always apparent, and might not always give you a building height. So yeah, those are the big constraints at the moment. Transportation figures, generally the cities have access to transportation data. So we find that the cities themselves can provide us with transportation data. Water and wastewater, solid waste data, generally the cities have this information. They again are generally always short of data on building areas. And there are always debates around the exact population of the city. And it is really determined by where you draw the boundary line. We're currently trying to normalize all of our data collection around using GIS to work with a firm boundary line for each city. And then once we start to model that city in detail, we will agree with them their version of the boundary line, and we'll re-extract data based on their version of the boundary line using our GIS technologies. But yeah, so it's where you draw the boundary. In Durban, interesting case, if in some of the data providers, if you search for Durban, it'll give you a population and a boundary. But if you search for eThekwini, it'll give you a different boundary and a very different population. And it's the same with many of the cities in South Africa, and that well, around the world actually, is that they tend to become metropolitans, which are grouped around smaller cities. Ekurhuleni, for example, I think there's six CBDs in Ekurhuleni. So it's to be able to calculate exact or at least fairly representative population numbers for number of people who live there. We've got to get the boundaries agreed, and it's that boundary on the GIS map that's really important.
Yeah, I think your answers are getting us more questions, so let's try to be
excellent.
The first one, now we know what is HELE stand for. It's high efficiency, low emission technologies. Of course, this should be sustainable if it is really going to be high efficiency, low emission. So I think this is a clear one. This is a follow-up from Wandeli. He asks, where is the data for city modeling obtained? So you mentioned GIS, you mentioned providers. So
yeah.
What else? Yeah.
Yeah, we've now got a database of around, I think, 900 cities, and it's taken us 3 years to get there. But there are open source data sets available in the World Bank data libraries. So you can Google and search on World Bank data, and you'll be able to find data sets there, which generally take us up to last year. So you'll be able to get data up to around 2020 normally. United Nations has, within all of their programs, have enormous amount of data which is freely available. World Health Organization has data sets which are freely available, downloadable. You can also access the Google Maps. If you're wanting to pay for data, you can access portals like TomTom. OpenStreetMaps is free to use, and you can extract things like lengths of roads, areas of parks and landscape. So that's what we use. We subscribe to TomTom, and we have used TomTom to extract roof areas, lengths of streets, areas of parkland, and developed and undeveloped land, because we use all of those to calculate stormwater runoff, for example. And we take information from United Nations on soil conditions in the cities to calculate groundwater seepage rates for things like groundwater recharge as one of our measures for improving water security. We might be looking at taking surface water and putting it back into the ground, and looking at surface water recharge into the aquifers. So all of that can be put together from open source data, which you can find not necessarily readily, but you can find on the internet.
Yeah, thanks, Nel. I think we have the last two questions. We are on time, and they are related to COVID-19 as the hot topic. The first one from Malisipa, it's about the influence of COVID-19 on urbanization. And he is giving example of Zoom cities. So I don't know what Zoom cities mean, but it's the influence of COVID-19 on urbanization and the influence of COVID-19 on the future modeling. And this is a question from Santosh. So yeah, can you please answer?
Hot topic indeed. We are also trying to wrap our heads around that. We've got, obviously within World Bank themselves, the humanitarian side of the bank has been completely immersed in this COVID-19 response, as well as monitoring economies through the pandemic. We are currently engaging with specialists within the bank to sort of try and draw out expectations from them around city growth rates and those sorts of things. But at the moment, we can only model based on what we know and caveat and discuss the result with the city. What we have found in a number of the cities we're engaging with is that infrastructure spend has really slipped quite dramatically during these last couple of years. And it's provided an opportunity for the cities to reevaluate their infrastructure spend now before rushing headlong into just pressing the go button again. So I think that COVID is probably going to cause some upheaval for us in our modeling. But it will also cause some upheaval, I think, in trying to identify which of the infrastructure projects are currently still relevant and which of them need to be modified at all before they go ahead. I'm not sure if I've answered your question there, but I think it's a really difficult question at the moment. We've got no sort of frame of reference to go back to. But yeah, the response that we're getting from cities is that there are great opportunities to revisit infrastructure spend now in the light of what's happened during COVID.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Neil. That was very informative, and I think we benefited a lot from the discussion. And we kept on time. We have only 3 minutes left, so I thank you again very much. And Sharon, over to you.
Thank you, Prof. And thank you to Neil for that informative and very valuable discussion. I also want to give thanks to Sanlam again, who have been sponsoring the series. So with that, on our way to lucky number 7 next week. And before we head into the evening, I would like to make 2 more announcements from SAICE Durban side. Firstly, I realized that I've been remiss in that I haven't alerted anyone to follow our social media pages. So I'd like to encourage you to please follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and we regularly update these pages, and we'd be so grateful if you guys followed and supported us on these pages. Also, I just want to tell everybody that's listening from industry that we are having our golf day on the 3rd of December. We have sent out our packages this week, and we are hoping to sell out the event. So if you guys are interested in playing a round of golf with us at the Mount Edgecombe Golf Club on the 3rd of December, please send Kavita an email. Her email address is durban@saice.org.za. And with that, I'd like to announce the forthcoming attraction for next week, which, as I said, is lucky number 7. We are going to have a project review by the dynamic duo from Arab South Africa, which is Michelin and Savannah. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that one and waiting to hear the review of the art here in Durban. Thank you, members. With that, good night and have a wonderful week ahead. Be safe and enjoy. Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.